Hello, and welcome to Blackatics. Thank you for tuning in. Please add us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. We usually only talk about politics and business, but today we want to dispel some bad information about the current pandemic that's going around, and hopefully give you some information that you can use. So let's dive right into it. So, the president said that we have never seen something like this before. He's lying. We have. We seen this in 1918. It was called the Spanish flu. And we will get into it later why it was called the Spanish flu. But the Spanish flu at the time killed around 500, well, it infected 500 million people worldwide. Can you imagine that? This country only has 340 million people that call United States its home. Can you imagine 500 million people being infected? That's like our country and Canada and Mexico included. So, to say that we've never seen this before is just false. We have seen this before 98, 99 years ago. Um, it killed 50 million people worldwide. To give you some context, that's like that's like the whole state of California and throw in probably Colorado and probably Montana. That's three states just wiped out. And so those are the facts about. Those are some of the facts about that that pandemic. Woodrow Wilson was the president then, and for people that understand history, we were enthralled in World War I. We were at the end of it, however, and the way it got out, or the way it circulated the world, was through the troops, through our allied forces. And there are two thoughts on how it got out. Really, people can't pinpoint, but there are two different mind processes. And one is that because our troops were sick, they were in cramped spaces, they were huddled together, and their immune systems were down. They were more susceptible to this strain, any strain of influenza. That's one thing. And then the second was that it came out of China, from migrant workers, and that our troops came in contact with them and unknowingly brought it back to whatever country or whatever, wherever they were going, their host country, well, their country of origin. Well, our first documented cases were in Fort Funston, when troops were coming back home from for leave. So, if you know anything about the military, you take leave, you go home for vacation or whatever. And so, because the war was winding down, a lot of people were taking leave and going home. And that's when the flu really started to migrate around the globe. 675 million people died in the United States. That's a lot of people for a country that only had about 103 million people at the time. Um, and if you read the history and read the newspapers of the day, they were talking about closing schools down, closing shows down, closing the churches down, staying in place. In some places, it was mandatory that you had to wear a mask. And so they were fully aware of how it spread it, but they just didn't understand how to contain it the right way, and contain it better. They did the best they could for the information they had of the day. but there is widespread and unanimous thought that the reason why it was as bad as it was because there was no real quarantine measures put in place. And a lot of that was because of government misinformation. Remember, I told you earlier about the reason why it was called the Spanish flu. So, this is why our president is so dangerous because of his misinformation. That was the same thing we were dealing with then. President Woodrow Wilson and the other allied powers decided that they were going to put a lid on what was going on because they did not want it to get out that they had a full scale pandemic on our hands. So they pretty much didn't talk about it. And when it was ever mentioned, they said, "What flu? I don't know anything about a flu." Well, Spain was a neutral country. They did not have a stake in the war. And so the press was free to say anything. And they were the ones that was saying, "Hey, the troops, they're spreading this virus, they're spreading this flu." And so the media properly coined it as the Spanish flu of the day, and that's how it became known as the Spanish flu, because of the censorship practices of the Allied nations. So whether you feel it was right or wrong, it was misinformation, and the governments of the Allied forces trying to tamp down on something that was that killed millions of people. Um, and so when the president says, that he said when it was a hoax, and he said that people don't die from the flu, or things like that, um, you just can't believe him because guess what? If anybody knows the impact of living with COVID 19 or flu and dying from it, and having their family die from it, he should know the most because his grandfather on his father's side died from the Spanish flu in 1918. And so, there you have it. Our own president's grandfather passed from a pandemic. In the same, likes of the one that we have now that he called a hoax. So just make sure that you're staying informed and staying abreast of what's going on because people have agendas that will keep you from being informed. I can honestly tell you that this is not a purification cleanse. Nobody is trying to cleanse a race of people or trying to wipe or population control. That's not what's going on. This is actually what happens in this world that we have. If you understand the way the world is, there's a lot of uncharted things that we don't even know about that's out there, that can surprise us. So thank you for tuning in. Like I said, like us, share us, but we just want to get the information out. And you have a good day. Thank you.